Well, welcome, Stephen.
Thank you.
We're really honored that you're joining us today, and I'm going to give a little intro to people who don't know me about who I am and Jane, and then I'm going to speak your biography in brief. So I'm Karen Van Vuuren, and I'm one of the founders of The Natural Funeral, which is a holistic funeral home in Boulder. And for about 20 years, I also was very involved in natural death care education, and actually had the privilege of liaising with you maybe 20 years ago when you were, in your beginnings, perhaps, although I know you go a long way back, and talking to your wife, and that Grief Walker film, I have to say, was shown at the Nomad Theatre. And that was my first introduction to you, and that's where you're going to be appearing on September the 20th. And so how lovely to have you back in person this time. And just to say a little bit about your biography for people who are watching this who don't know, you describe yourself, I hope, as a culture activist, a worker and author, and you are the creator and principal instructor of the Orphan Wisdom School, which convenes semi-annually in Deakin, Ontario, Canada, and in Northern Europe. I hope the Northern Europe is still happening, or will be happening soon if you've taken a break from that over the last few years. Stephen, you're also the author of a number of books, including the award-winning Die Wise, a manifesto for sanity and soul. And your most recent book is called Reckoning and is co-authored with Kimberly Ann Johnson. So, Stephen, welcome.
Thank you.
Again. And you've been walking this dark road, as you call it, for a while now. And we've certainly had more darkness in the last few years. And as you are now on this tour and are being again with people in person, how is that dark road different? How has it changed in the last few years? The ground beneath you, what does that terrain look like?
It's wonderful to be asked a question that's not about me. Yeah. Well, we just came back from a tour of Europe a week ago, and then I did the school at the farm until Sunday afternoon. Sunday night, I did a show in Toronto. Monday, I got on a plane to come here to Idaho, and we have a show tomorrow night, and there's no rest apparently for the wicked, they say. What have I seen? I've seen there's a lot of reportage. I find that people are saying things like, I did an interview this morning where the man said, there's so much more hurt than there was, for example. Things of this kind. There's a sense of a kind of wound to the, they used to call it the body politic when there was such a thing as us to imagine. But there's so many splinters and so many shards now. It's very unclear that this phrase even works anymore. And maybe that's part of the woundedness as well. I've been confronted frequently in interviews with this suggestion that, after 30 months of introspection, that's the imagining. After those 30 months, there must be, and the dying that ensued, we should say, that somehow the culture as a whole has developed a familiarity with dying that it didn't have before. And there must be some skillfulness that allegedly puts me at ease and semi-retires me from the work I've been doing for 25 or so years. I don't find that this is the case at all. First of all, a pandemic is not the same thing as an encounter with the meant to be realities of dying at all. A pandemic is a crisis. And if anything, one's dying should be off the critical list. and onto the list of ordinary things where it belongs. Unspectacular, absolutely anticipatable things. So it shouldn't be on the front page. It shouldn't be news, but alas, it remains so. Finally, the notion that there's a normal to get back to that's worth getting back to is a very, very questionable proposition. When I listen carefully to the longing after, obviously no more masks and all that sort of stuff, it's really a longing for recognizable time when you imagine that your personal freedom was unrestrained. So that would be 2019, for God's sake. And I'm asking anybody who's listening, do you really think that after everything the last 30 months could have meant to us, could have subjected us to, could have asked of us, returning to 2019 is even, it doesn't approach the obscene, actually, to imagine that 2019 is some kind of high watermark culturally and emotionally and psychologically and mythically. I think it's far from it. Unfortunately, 2019 was as bad as it gets, and we're hearkening after that. All that amnesia, all of that, let's pretend, all of that, if I can't see it, it must not be true. All of that idea that I actually get a choice. My personal opinion counts when it comes to things like global warming and what it means to kids who are 16 years old. And anyway, you could tell it's not difficult to get worked up if you're contending on the one side with what hasn't changed but is actually increased in depth of weirdness and amnesia on the one side, and this kind of make-believe that somehow if we just think positively or do enough trauma work that individually, that somehow the sun will cool off and the pigeons will come back and the whales will be happy with us.
Do you feel that it's, Stephen, really like just moving? We don't want to go back, but we're moving forward in a different way with our broken hearts and the shatteredness that has happened.
I'm not sure what you mean by moving forward. What are you thinking when you say that?
I guess just we're not going back, clearly, and we shouldn't, for those people that feel like going back to 2019, the normal, but just stepping forward into each day with everything that we've taken in for the past 30 months. And
well, wouldn't it be something if recent history was actually a teacher and not an inconvenience?
That was going to be a question of mine. Like, is there something that we could learn?
mm-hmm.
From the last 30 months?
Yes.
Sure. I think I could put it very succinctly, which is unusual for me, probably. It would go like this. There's 2 road signs on the super highway that we're insisting on speeding down. One of them says, be prepared to stop. That still introduces the idea that there's some kind of choice to be had, that there's a bit of wiggle room yet, and that the notion of preparation is an important thing, and that stopping is important too. And just beyond that sign, there's another one on the opposite side of the road that says, okay then, be prepared to be stopped. There's not a third sign, I don't believe.
Okay.
The title of your new book, Stephen, is Reckoning.
Reckoning.
And it seems like we're really in a moment of reckoning. It's an opportunity. And I wonder if you can tell us a bit about how you came to write this last book with your co-author.
It's the first time I've done that. It's really not much in my hands, this book. That's why it came out so quickly, after the one that preceded it, called A Generation's Worth. It came out a year almost to the day after that one. Very simply, a woman who I didn't know, who turns out to be Kimberly Johnson, got in touch with us and asked if, based on a certain kind of personal and also professional dishevelment that she was experiencing, largely because she was, I think, contending with some of the things we've just been talking about now in her practice as a woman's wellness practitioner. I'll just refer to all her work in that brief phrase. And she was finding a degree of splinteredness within that practice area, and people that she once thought were friends, allies, more importantly, perhaps, and confidants, based on things like vaccination policies and all the rest. The thing was blowing apart at the seams, basically. So could she talk to me about this? And I thought I wasn't persuaded that this would make a worthy hour-long, interview encounter, or 90 minutes, whatever it turned out to be. But it turned out to be very much that. She had a lot of questions which were, like, I would call them almost naked making. Not for me, for her. There was a degree of absolutely disarmed forlornness that was in what she was asking me about. So we did the piece, and she had prepared it, so she had the audience, and they were all the people that had been following her over the years, and I wasn't really sure how it went, but we got a message later that evening from her directly saying that she was basically a mess as a result of she'd principally wept through the whole interview, but she did a good job of doing it quietly. So without my glasses on, I honestly couldn't tell. I didn't know that was the case. So, and she was just thanking me. So I wrote back and I said, look, it seems absolutely becoming for both of us if we get back on the horse tomorrow. And even if you have no audience, we'll get back on the horse tomorrow nonetheless. But this is what we'll talk about. The sense of having been, well, I don't want to characterize what her emotional state at the time was, but it was a rough ride, obviously, for someone who's professional and very well put together and very achieved in her own work. And so we did the very next day. And somewhere in there, she asked me if I would do consent, even though I was planning to cool off and not be on the internet any longer and so on. If I would do a series of 5 sessions with her, one each devoted to the books that I'd written, and one to the music and the thing that's brought me on the road here just now, called Nights of Grief and Mystery. So against my better judgment, probably, I agreed to do it. And we knew very early on, between the response to the first 2 and what was happening, that there was some merit here. We didn't know what form it would take, but obviously we looked at the transcripts thereafter and decided that was the basis of something that was publishable. And we sort of, not summarized, we ended that thing. She wrote the preface to the book, and then we each wrote something to each other by way of a conclusion, which we called the chapter heading Blessings. But the word blessings etymologically relates to blood, the spilling of blood, because it comes from sacrificial days. That word literally means that. So this is what I was implying as well. And she wrote something to me that was something in the order of 3 pages, and I wrote something that was about 23 pages. So I felt a little that I'd overdone it, but it was too late because this is what we agreed to do. And so that becomes the tail end of the book, some exchange of realms of concern, you could say. My principal concern was for her generation and her daughter's generation. And I suppose that was her concern as well. So that's the way it happened. And, I'm more than happy to have been able to participate and be troubled aloud, as is my custom.
So thus far, what have been the main reactions to Reckoning? Like, what is it that people have honed in on in particular that has been provocative in a good way to get them to really think about things? What are the main areas that have really struck people?
It's what, 2 weeks or something? So I don't really can't be very authoritative about what the response has been. I can tell you this, that the first print run sold out within a couple of days. So now we're running into this terrible problem of the so-called supply chain dilemma. So there's no paper to print a second print run. And so it's been very delayed. I think it's finally going to be available maybe Monday or Tuesday next week. So, I mean, maybe that's an indication, but that's just anticipation. That doesn't come from reading it. If I were to guess an answer to your question, part of it would be there's a lot of people coming to what I do because of this association with her, and they would never have otherwise sought me out in any way at all. And the gender dynamics would be a part of the reason why. And I suppose anytime you engage something that is outside of your realm of preference and your custom and your habit, there's a possibility that things could turn out otherwise, beyond your plans. And I understand that to be bordering on the godly, that opportunity. So, and the same thing probably is the other way, that people who would come to the book because my name is a recognizable one to them, are at least curious whether or not a younger woman would survive the anticipated brawl that they might imagine was in the book. There actually is no brawl, to disappoint people who are imagining that that's what it would be. But the book itself is bare-knuckled, I would say, which is to me that its concerns with the troubles of the times are very palpable, and it's not a book that traffics in the illusion that another few weeks of post-pandemic life and we should be in good shape or anything of the kind. It's a really clear call for a consideration that culturally speaking, I'm not even talking about environmentally now, that culturally speaking, we are kind of up against the wall. And there's not a lot of opportunity for humming and hawing and posturing, and never mind what passes for justice in this so-called social justice world that we find ourselves in now.
Thank you. So it sounds like we will just wait to see what reception there is on a broader level. It's early days.
It's early days.
Yeah. So Stephen, I don't know if you're aware, but we work in a funeral home. I'm one of the founders, and Jane is on the team, and we certainly, our staff and the families that come to us have been reckoning with a lot of young death, young people who come through our doors who just find it untenable to stay. And that despair that they feel, I know you have a heart for, and that's in your awareness, and in your program, in your school. How does that perception of the crisis that our young people are in inform what you offer in your teachings?
Overtly, my school is not a cause or a cause-centered event. It's fundamentally a learning-centered event. So it's not devoted to particular problems. There's a reading list per session, but it's quite historical, mythic, and poetic in the orientation. So overtly, the answer to your question would be, you'd have to look for it to find it. But there's two ways to do this, at least. One of them is that you make the books that you assign the focus of the session, or you conduct the session as if everyone's read the books. That means you don't have to put the book front and center. For example, the book that we just worked through with the people who just left is the old Anglo-Saxon epic called Beowulf. Now, it's what, I can't do the quick math, 1700 years old or something of this order. And it's allegedly a heroic tale about contending with monsters in the wild. And I mean, it's not about that at all, but that's typically the way it's spoken about. What could this possibly have to do with the trouble and the times that we're in? Well, the notion of monstrosity is very current, actually. And so it wasn't a big stretch at all. And the notion that the monstrosity tends to take away the enduring first, takes away it messes with the architecture before it messes with the furniture. Let's put it that way. And that in human form, that would mean that in a crisis such as the one I believe that we're in, there's a fundamental compromise that gathers around people of my age and makes very questionable to younger people the notion that there's something inherently wise and compelling and necessary about the presence of older people, period. Meanwhile, the older people are coming, and I'm counseling them as follows. Listen, if you live long enough, and perhaps you already have, it is going to come down to this sooner than you think. The young person or young people will seek you out inadvertently or otherwise, accidentally, and there'll be two questions on their mind. No matter what they say, these questions will be there. And the first one will be, when you were my age, did you know what was happening? That's a very serious proposition to ask, because what they want to hear, what they desperately need to hear, is that people of my age did not know what was happening when we were their age. And why would they want to hear that, of all things? And I think the answer is, well, if we tell them that we didn't know, that somehow accounts for the condition of the world as we're handing it off to them over the next 5 or 8 years. Somehow it makes it endurable. Somehow it explains it. Perhaps doesn't forgive it, but at the very least explains it. But how can you possibly explain the truth? The truth is, we did know. We knew enough. We knew enough that it could have been otherwise, but it wasn't otherwise, because fundamentally we didn't act on what we knew, because it wasn't bad enough. There, that's the truth. And so the next question will be, of course, so what did you do? And you know, younger people fundamentally need to believe that they come from people who are worthy of coming from. This is one of the structural elements in the Nights of Grief and Mystery show that we're doing. There's a piece called Fate, which is basically a love letter to people 1/3 my age, but it's not a get well card. It's not good wishes. It's a frank assessment of what I'm talking to you about right now. And it's quite amazing. It's a very stilling thing. And at the end of it, invariably, there are whoops from younger people, whoops in the house for something that's very lamenting, you see. Why? Well, because, quote unquote, somebody gets it. You know, that they're not the only people who are fairly sure that the sky's falling, that sort of thing.
In your upcoming show here in Boulder, how much will there be that focuses on reckoning, and how much will be material that is nothing to do with that new book?
Well, the show was crafted before the book came into existence, or before Kimberly was in touch with me. The basis of the show now, we've been doing some version of these things for 7 years. And it's changed fundamentally over time as we've got more familiar with what we're doing. And I've, crafted a lot of new things for it. The simple truth is this: Gregory Hoskins, my partner in the project, came down to Mexico, where I was in the winter of late 29, early 2020. And we worked on a new record. And it's a wonder what you can do with just a small suitcase full of stuff. That's basically a studio. So you can really decide now to make a record. And we did so in kind of a isolated adobe house way up in a canyon somewhere, with no no running water, and certainly no internet connection and all that sort of thing. And we did this record, and we already had a name for it. We called it Rough Gods. And there was a lot going on. Then we turned on the radio 10 days or 12 days later, only to hear what was happening to your world. It wasn't actually occurring where we were too isolated. But we found out about this thing called a pandemic and COVID-19. We didn't have a clue. And we basically were experiencing it in real time. And it was an absolute affirmation in the bleakest way you can imagine. It was an affirmation of what had been coming to us, minus the information, you see, minus being plugged in. This is a very trustworthy moment to be part of, to realize something is running through you that's not personal, that's not your personal concern. And it's announcing itself before you have any evidence that it's not just you. And so, you have obviously an obligation to take that very seriously and obey it and see what you can do to translate what came to you into something that could be available to people who weren't there. And you could say that's the fundament of the show, although the show is much more ceremonial than it would ever be problem driven. I mean, it's not problem driven at all. It begins with a prayer, for example. So it's an understanding that ceremony is the order of the day, and not complaint, not belligerence, and certainly not opinion, but some willingness to call in, ancestral presence, and something like, if I could put it this way, the gods of the particular place that you're in, the spirits of the place, this kind of thing. This is where we're headed, and that may surprise, given everything I've just said. It may sound like I'm a kind of social critic who uses the Nights of Grief and Mystery to criticize and condemn. It's, I can do that elsewhere if I'm inclined to do it at all. I don't need to steal somebody's evening in order to make them feel bad. It's quite the contrary. I'm doing this the way I did working with dying people, that rather than try to make them feel better, I'd see what I could do to encourage them profoundly and oblige them to feel more, not better. And more turns out to be better than better ever was.
Wow, that's lovely. Encouraging people to feel more, not better. I'm going to hang on to that one. It's a gem. Are you so steeped in what you're doing now that you don't necessarily have a next project already on the horizon, or how do you work?
That's a good question. Well, I had been working on a book about matrimony, actually, some before the pandemic. And it was rejected by the publisher who had published the previous two books. Yeah. And I sat with it for a while because I knew it was good, but they were vaguely critical of what they called the voice. It wasn't the same kind of voice as Daiwai's and so forth. And I thought to myself, well, of course not. I have no obligation to occupy the same voice, the same posture, the same position in life that I had 7 or so years ago when I wrote Daiwai's. But then I realized, hearing a few other things, what it was. I mean, if you look at me, you'll know the answer as to what happened. What really happened is the flavor of the month changed. So I'm the wrong color, and I'm the wrong gender, and I'm the wrong demographic. Otherwise, I probably it might have worked. Now you can hear that sound that I warned you about. The fan's just gone off.
Oh, wow.
So I'll put this little blanket over it, and maybe that'll help. So yeah, I'm going to come back to the matrimony book at some point soon. And I also have a book 3/4 almost finished about something in a quick way of referring to it, I call it Grief and Dirt. It's ostensibly about farming. It's ostensibly about a concern with things, not agricultural so much as I'm contending with this madness called back to the land and rewilding and natural and all this sort of thing. And I think it's important for somebody who actually does that work to respond to this lunacy that comes from more usually urban quarters, that somehow the world should now get ready for an inundation of legions of refugees who've liquidated their holdings in downtown and are looking for the sanity of the countryside, as if the countryside has an obligation to become a petting zoo for their wounded soul, you see. So as you can tell, I mean, I just turned 68, and somewhere along the line, they say you're supposed to cool out and, and just enjoy whatever time you have left. And well, I'm not cooling out, but I am enjoying the time I have left.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that's clear. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stephen. We will see you in Boulder in just over a week. And we absolutely thank you for all you do. And thanks for bringing criticism and ceremony and all of it together that just makes it so rich.
Oh, you're very kind. Thanks for this invitation, for your time as well.
Yeah.
Thank you for your
Okay.
time.
Take care.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.